how and where did life start?
Life is made from building blocks, and those building blocks are organic molecules that somehow came together into the first types of cells, the first protocells. And so I think one of the first questions is, where did the building blocks of life come from? And interestingly, many of those building blocks of life are made in space.
Really?
Yeah. So if you look at the Murchison meteorite, it contains amino acids. It contains the building blocks of nuclear bases of DNA. It contains phosphates. So phospholipids are key for cell membranes. So certainly many of the building blocks of life don't have to have been made on Earth. They could be made in space. And back then, when the Earth was very young, sort of around 4 billion years ago, there was a lot more collisions of rocks in the solar system and Earth. The moon had recently formed from a collision.
Is there an easy explanation for why there were more?
Just because when planets form, they, through the force of gravity, they'll sort of suck up as they go around lots of debris.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're kind of vacuuming the
Exactly, they're kind of vacuuming up. Our guess is that the building blocks of life are really reasonably quite common. They then arrived on Earth, and the next step is they needed to accumulate into a sort of reasonably high concentration. And the reason for that is, life is run on lots of, of millions of ongoing reactions. And if your molecules are too spread out, life is not going to be able to get going. And so the question is, how did life accumulate? How did the molecules accumulate? And also you need an energy source in those locations where those molecules become concentrated. And so there's two arguments that have been made as to where life could have got going. Both involve volcanoes or volcanic activity. One of them is that life got started in hydrothermal vents in the ocean. And a lot of volcanic, highly reactive molecules, hydrogen sulfides and what have you, are bubbling through. And early life would have been able to use those highly reactive molecules in order to power some of the reactions that were necessary for early life. And it's possible that concentrations of the molecules that life used were able to accumulate in tiny little sort of cell-like structures that form naturally, crystalline structures that form naturally around these hydrothermal vents. The other argument is they form on hydrothermal plains. So those are freshwater, those are places on land where volcanic activity touches the surface of the land where there's fresh water. And so places like Yellowstone and Iceland, where you get a lot of thermal volcanic activity, are good places. So those are the two arguments where the concentrations occurred.
Okay, so in the waters, and interestingly fed by space.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful image of this kind of early Earth where ingredients are being spit in from the outside and okay, and then they get going in the waters. Is there anything else we should say before we move to the next step?
So there are some chemical reactions where a molecule is able to replicate itself. Now, you said you don't want to get into autocatalytic reactions, but that's what they are. And so the first life would have been a relatively simple autocatalytic reaction, and it would have been attached to something called the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle, which all life runs on now. And we don't fully understand exactly how everything got going, but it did, and it got going really quite quickly. So this is another reason why people argue that simple life might be quite common, because life, the moon was formed in a massive collision with the Earth 4.5 billion years ago. It melted the Earth's surface. It would have destroyed any organic molecules that had formed on Earth. Earth had to be reseeded. The earliest life really could have got going would probably be about 4.2 billion years ago. It was probably a little bit later. But we know that by 4 billion years ago, it was up and running. And by 3.9 billion years ago, all life was using the same genetic code, and that's the genetic code that we use now. So simple life got going actually really surprisingly quickly, which gives hope that life may start on other planets, particularly given the building blocks are made in space, right? So, yeah.
So the aliens might very well be there.
Certainly simple life may be quite common. We don't know, but that's a hypothesis, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay.